Don't hurt yourself.
I don't know how I did that, but that's skill.
That is a very special skill you have.
Greetings, everybody. It is I, the infamous Watson Ash. I am a former art major with a rather significant history of exploring art all over the world. Also a history of tattoo art, street art, and former university student who has studied it extensively.
And I'm Brianna Jean. I haven't studied a lot of art, but I am a great appreciator of art, and I like talking about creative stuff with nerd friends.
Woohoo! I qualify as both a nerd and a friend, and of course, this is an unexpected art show. I completely forgot
Unexpected
the name.
Art lesson.
Swing and a miss, me. And of course, art does play a significant purpose in, well, everything from media to inspiration and whatnot. So we are talking about how art has, a particular art style has begun, progressed, and even where the ancient masters still have their influences today. This is, of course, an unexpected art lesson.
The show where we talk about everything you didn't know about art, which a lot of it's just stuff that I never knew, and then me making up stuff and Watson being impressed.
I'm happy to convey the intro I know.
So, what are we talking about this week?
So this week we are talking about Ukiyo-e. This is Japanese block printing, referencing various artists that have started back in the early 1830s. The city that will eventually become Tokyo is alive with commerce, culture, and art. In wooden workshops throughout the city, masters like Katsushika Hokusai are revolutionizing visual storytelling through a medium that will influence artists for centuries to come. Ukiyo-e, and also known as pictures of the floating world.
And these aren't just pretty pictures, though they are very pretty pictures. They were the street art of their time. Ukiyo-e prints captured everything from kabuki actors to legendary warriors, from intimate domestic scenes to towering waves. Most of you have probably immediately pictured the art that we're talking about when I say that. They were mass-produced, affordable, and everywhere. It's basically like Instagram. Very ancient Instagram. But what made the revolutionary wasn't just the subject matter itself, it was their techniques.
Some of these technical innovations that did begin in the 1830s has carried over to modern storytelling as well even cinematic takes. Of course, the Ukiyo-e masters developed these techniques that became fundamental through uses of bold outlines that just pop up from the background, dramatic compositions that draw the eye, the use of flat color planes, which is a stark contrast to Bosch's detailed layering and glazing work that we discussed previously. But with the flat color choices, it creates this much more dramatic impact based on the style. And of course, they also were the ones who helped develop what is known as the multiple block printing that allowed artists to layer these colors with just this amazing precision that nowadays people would rely on Photoshop for. One of the other things that Ukiyo-e was more known for is a much more contemporary use of negative space to create emphasis within their works.
Yeah, a lot of people underestimate the importance of having that negative space, having that blank space, having that visual or auditory silence. But that shift can have a big impact, and it can help draw the attention to one thing or another. Whether it's something that is bold and in your face or something that it takes you a while to notice, and then when you notice, things start to click into place.
Exactly, and through the use of block printing and Ukiyo-e, other art styles have emerged as being inspired by this. Of course, I'm talking about one of my favorite subjects, street art. A lot of the first street artists, and especially the underground stuff, You're seeing artists using these bold outlines and flat colors. They're not trying to create this very subtle or very unique gradient. They are going, I was here, here's my art, and allowing people to kind of enjoy the view. The other thing that this does actually come through very interestingly as well is the use of gaming environments, dramatic angles, so things such as when you see those battle scenes right before like a match in Street Fighter begins, that would be a great example of Ukiyo-e and the compositions found within there. And of course, obviously, manga and anime have drawn heavily from that particular visual style, especially the old school, like the standard manga of always being in black and white, using negative space. These things are what allow manga and anime to have a very unique art style, but at the same time, you're seeing them use so much with just very little. The visual narrative is fantastic, especially when you compare them to Western comics and their need for color and these bombastic images, but at the same time, each have their own visual narrative. And obviously, because we're talking about woodblock printing, and I will annoy whatever fine artists are listening to this, modern printmaking, and of course digital art. Modern printmaking, of course, using roller print and having to line up their individual colors, and digital art as well, especially when it comes to, say, things such as the 4-scale printing.
But before we get too far into the modern, let's go back a bit to the beginning. Some of this original, maybe some of the more well-known block printed art from this time period, because Watson sent me multiple examples, one of which being the Great Wave off
Hokusai.
It's by Hokusai, but it's the Great Wave off Kanagawa. My brain took its sweet time figuring out how to pronounce that word.
Yeah, I've made my peace with I will probably accidentally mispronounce a couple of these, and anybody who is listening to this and is Japanese,
we apologize.
Ditto. So, first up we are going to talk about is, of course, Kata Sushi Ka Hokusai. I would like to say this dude could be credited as one of the first street artists, as his history is kind of unique, where many artists, especially in contemporary, early Renaissance, Baroque, they all stuck with their initial name, and their work was heralded based upon their lineage. Hokusai went the other way around. Imagine being 70 years old and believing you're just getting started. That's Hokusai in a nutshell. He was born in the 1760s in Edo. He was known for declaring that nothing he created before the age of 70 was worthy of notice. Now, this dude's a perfectionist at his finest. Throughout his entire artistic career, he changed his name over 30 times, and with each new name is a new artistic phase that he was inspired by.
That sounds like a lot of work, and I think given that time period, it probably wasn't nearly as difficult to change your name as it is nowadays. You just go hang out in a different neighborhood and no one knows. But it is interesting how a lot of this started later. It's a nice reminder that it's never too late to get off your butt and do the art that you want to do. Do the things that you maybe have been scared to do. I say that with lots of love and a very pointed look.
I was about to say, I feel pointed out here.
I mean, that is how we got to be doing this show. It's just, hey, let's do a thing. I'm going to tug you outside of your comfort zone.
I am very easy to lure into these things. Let's just go with that.
Yeah, it wasn't difficult. And it's already been so much fun.
Flipping it back to Hokusai, though, one of the things that really does show that this dude did his homework and then some was, of course, his obsession with constant reinvention. Every time he mastered an art style, and if he wasn't happy with it, he would move on.
Just a little bit of a perfectionist.
Just a little.
But he did stick around long enough to master it. It doesn't sound like he did the you try it once and you're not perfect immediately. He took the time to learn, and then when it wasn't quite what he was looking to do, he tried something else. At least that's how I'm understanding it.
Oh, you nailed it perfectly, actually. The first work that he was notably recognized for, of course, was the Great Wave off Kanagawa. And this was, of course, when he was in his 70s and had already abandoned multiple styles. However, the Great Wave is one of the more notable works of his because of all these styles he had investigated and became familiar with before he went with the Great Wave. Some of the kind of keynotes for that is, of course, introducing dramatic perspective, especially when you look at that particular piece, as it is, at the time, this was a style of art that had not been seen other in examples such as Renaissance and earlier art styles, where it was a much different perspective. Usually kind of had the either view of divinity, that overhead perspective, while the Great Wave off Kanagawa is this more below perspective where you are seeing these massive waves about to crash upon this boat, and in the distance is the mountains.
It almost feels like you're standing on shore or perhaps looking out of a window since you can't see the shore. And that distance from what is about to happen.
Exactly. It changes from earlier art styles of the divinity looking down to the viewer's gaze is now within the art itself.
The attention to detail in the shape of the wave and in the ocean spray, how there's like the foam along the edge and then like pieces of the foam dripping down. It's very dynamic and realistic feeling, even though the particular medium, like, it's not going to be perfectly realistic, at least I would assume with what they had back then, but that still looks like the dynamics feel right. The motion feels right.
And when you think about how the woodblock carving is done with this, you really have to imagine the amount of precision he put into each of those cuts.
Can you describe what all would have gone into woodblock printing during this time period? Like, give an example of what that would look like?
I do have that, actually.
I figured.
I just gotta bring out my notes because I forgot that one.
And this is why we do the books after we do the recordings.
Exactly. Alright, so with woodblock printing, it is a multi-stage process. Initially, the text or image that is first created is put on a layer of what is called washi, which is thin Japanese paper. It is then glued face down onto onto very smooth grained wood. So usually they would work off of cherry wood, just because obviously that particular region, cherry wood is a very, very easy to obtain material.
Accessible.
Thank you. I was trying to figure out that word. Oil, of course, is then applied over top to make the image more visible and allow the next step, which is, of course, the incisions along both sides of each line. So they're not just carving out a tiny line. They are actually cutting out every line. There's always got to be two cuts. So you have to think about it differently than if you're drawing, because drawing is always just a single line. Everything they do has to be done in 2 stages. After they've done that, the wood is then chiseled away based on those outlines and the incisions created. The block is then inked using a brush and a flat hand-held tool called a barin, or barin. I'm pretty sure it's barin. Again, my pronunciation is trash. I do my best. This is then pressed against the paper and the woodblock to apply the ink. A little bit more info on the barin. It is composed of 3 different pieces. An inner core made from bamboo leaves twisted into a rope, which is, interestingly enough, it's an early stage of a paintbrush, or even a brush pen that is commonly used by manga artists.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because that would also be the best to fill in.
Exactly. The coil is then contained within a disc called an atagawa, which is made of layers of very thin paper glued together and wrapped in a dampened bamboo leaf. The ends are then tied together to create the handle. It is basically, if you Google what a Japanese or bamboo brush pen would look like, that is the modern day version to this precursor. Nowadays, it is much more common to have these made of aluminum with ball bearings that it would apply the pressure, but you still gotta respect the OG.
That wasn't an option back then.
Exactly. And then, of course, once this is done, the first prints were simply one color, also known as sumizuri-e, with additional colors then applied by hand. And this process is called kapazuri-e. Eventually, this actually was then combined with the registration marks called the kento. This is interestingly how block print artists were able to start lining up those multiple colors. Not only does this allow them to actually create their own signature and identify their works, which with Japanese process of seals and denotations of who created these works, this is also how they used it to guide the work when it is more than one single color.
Yeah, because there's not a lot of room for mistakes, especially when you are creating the blocks to do the different layers. Imagine so much trial and error, just so much. And even when you do it right, things could still go wrong. But the amount of commitment to make these pieces is astounding, especially when you look at how much detail there is. And with the Great Wave, just how many layers and colors there are.
And I wish I had remembered this, but during the Edo period, there actually is a wood block print that has a cat's paw on it because a cat literally walked across while they were putting this together. Speaking of mistakes that have happened...
Cats.
Yep. Just remember, folks.
Cats. That's cats for you.
Even back then, cats are jerks.
It just makes it special. Like when something is misprinted and that makes it rare and makes it cost more. It's just special.
Limited edition!
Also, at least the cat didn't bat the art off of the table.
That was the print afterwards. That is a simple kind of cut down version of how these things would have been created. The other interesting thing about block print is this is kind of the first stage of how, especially ukiyo-e, had evolved into being different styles of art, different sizes and styles of art. There's everything from the koban, which is basically what you would nowadays consider a artist trading card, all the way to things such as hashira-e, which is known as a pillar print, which is up to 73 by 12 centimeters tall, and even eventually things such as the kakemono-e, which would be actually hanging scrolls, which, if you've been to any type of manga store, is a very common thing that you'd actually be seeing displayed for various titles. So when you look at your wall scroll, now you know exactly where it originated from.
Yeah, or at least the design behind it, if not the specific scroll.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it.
Although if it is, like, the specific scroll that you're looking at, that's really cool, and you should share a picture on our social media when we're posting about this. Because art's cool, and we want to see it. I probably have some, but I will be sharing once I can get some pictures of it, because I've got a family member a couple generations back who wrote about sociology and demographics in China and Japan. At least I believe she did Japan. I know for a fact she did China. And was gifted some, what I believe, I could be mistaken, I'll be sharing it anyway, is some of these woodblock prints. Either way, the art's cool, I'll be sharing it. But the connection's been bugging me since I started putting two and two together, and I'm like, I have to know now.
I am always happy to help inspire new research. Of course, Japan and China both shared into the woodblock printing. Ukiyo-e is usually primarily used to denote Japanese era block printing, and I believe Chinese has a different term, and I really wish I had thought of researching that beforehand, because I have now drawn a blank.
I do love the fact that the term ukiyo-e translates to pictures of the floating world, or something akin to that.
Yeah, that would be actually what it translates to, which denotes also the ethereal quality. Flipping back to Hokusai, that is, of course, the first big thing is the dramatic perspective change in Japanese art, which is, of course, boils down to the floating world. One of the other things that Hokusai is well known for and helped kind of inspire future artists, especially when it came to the ukiyo-e world, is use of the Prussian blue pigment. Up until this point, blue had often looked faded, and even earlier prints compared to Hokusai did not have that same dramatic boldness that his work had. This is also what helped bring other color choices into the block prints, which does give continues the ethereal style that is found within ukiyo-e.
Looking at the Great Wave, there is a lot of that really bold blue, but that just makes the white foam of the waves and the lighter, softer colors of the boat stick out more.
Precisely. One of the other things that is interesting about Hokusai is if you look up his sketchbooks, you'll notice that it does have a very familiar kind of feel to them. It is these sketched figures that almost seem to have their own story found within, which, if you extrapolate off of that, it's manga.
Yeah, I'm looking at Hokusai sketchbooks in Google Images, which if you are not driving right now, you should do. If you are driving right now, you should do this later.
I will only account for my own poor life choices.
Yeah, there's some images where the art goes from one page to the next, like it takes up the full spread the scene does. And then there's others where it's multiple sketches within one thing telling a story. Some of it is things happening all at once, others look to be more in the manga style. There's some really interesting creatures here too. I'm seeing weird fish things. I don't know what it is about artists and weird fish, but artists have a thing for fish.
Fish are usually some of the more central imagery chosen, especially when it came to ukiyo-e and Japanese block printing.
Yeah.
Also, cucumber demons. Kappas.
Cucumber demons?
Kappas!
When I take a second to remember the fact that yes, Japan's an island, it's less surprising that there's lots of fish, but it's interesting. Oh, there's one sketchbook I found where it looks like he's just drawn pictures of creatures like icy snakes and lizards and moths.
Definitely, especially when it comes to ukiyo-e, the innovation that comes from the animals in the world around, especially when it comes to the inspiration of historic and mythic figures. These are just fantastic sources of inspiration.
Yeah, because the attention to detail is nice to see. It's visually interesting. It's not always super busy, but just the cleanness and I don't know how it's described, but it's smooth, it's clean, it's neat. Some of it's kind of busy, but it flows.
That is a perfect summary of kind of what Hokusai's objectives were with ukiyo-e. One of the other unique hallmarks that I guess we should probably discuss as well is with Japanese block printing. This is kind of the first step towards even the precursor to street art, because this allows these works to be reproduced multiple times. People can have these in their homes, they can display them on the street. They're no longer isolated to just a cramped gallery or a place that only particular people can view. These are simpler to recreate and available, a lot more available, so people can display it at wherever they want.
Yeah, you can have this inspirational art in your house, which I mean, nowadays that doesn't feel huge because it's easy to get reprints, but back then, back in the 1830s and onward, that wasn't something that you could easily get. And not only was like easily reproduced, but the art is gorgeous. It's inspiring. Some of it's incredibly detailed. It's got personality to it.
Especially if you can find one of the cat paw print versions, limited edition.
Find one that has been visited by a cat. You've been listening to an unexpected art lesson featuring Brianna, Jean, and Watson, as well as the music of Rick the Whitebird. Stay tuned next time to learn more about the art of Japanese woodblock printing. If you like what we're doing, you can follow us on social media and join the conversation over at An Unexpected Art Lesson on Threads, Blue Sky, and Substack. And you can also support us over on Patreon, get early access to episodes and other fun things at patreon.com/anunexpectedartlesson.